Good evening. This is the second session of the Purim Webinar. We began last week discussing certain issues to do with Purim that kind of are counterintuitive, we might think would be the reality of Purim. We have one approach, and then we have all these mitzvahs and ideas and concepts to do with Purim that seem to have a different approach. And we spoke about I think we spoke about the nafochu, the whole concept of Purim is how things were turned upside down in their head. Everything just flips around because one moment we're facing extinction, we're facing a genocide, we're facing a Holocaust at the beginning. In fact, there is an idea I mentioned before in the past, and I'm not even exactly sure of the source of this idea, but it says that the Jewish people in the Midbar, the desert, we basically 600,000, 600,000. Even though there were millions of Jews in the desert, at least 3 million altogether, including the elderly and the women and the children. But the basic number that the Talmud seems to deal with and the Zohar seems to deal with, 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, and there were 10 sins. If you multiply 10 sins and by 600,000, of course you get 6 million. And there was a gezerah against 6 million Jews, so to speak. I'm not sure if this idea is 100% true, but certainly raises eyebrows, that's for sure. And it was pushed off. It got pushed off and pushed off and pushed off and pushed off. And Amalek, as the Gemara says, was a punishing belt in the hand of Hashem. And somehow someone came along, Moshe pushed it off in his time, another Gedolim pushed it off in their time, and Mordechai pushed it off in his time. And then eventually there was nobody around by the time the Holocaust occurred to actually be able to push it off. And also reaching the end of history, we didn't rectify, and some want to say that this is really what the Holocaust basically came to do. But that idea aside, the point is just that we were facing extinction. We're facing a terrible situation. It looked bleak, terribly bad for the Jewish people, all of them, because pretty much we're all there. And then it just turns around completely and turns everything on its head. And next we know that the very gallows that were supposed to be used to Haman built to hang Mordechai, the protagonist in the story, ends up being used for Haman and his 10 sons as well. And we celebrate this idea of nafachu. But nafachu is also the idea of nunafuch, which is the idea of the upside down nun. And where did we see this idea of the upside down nun? We see the upside down nun in the Chumash itself, in Parshas B'Midbar. We have, it's in Parshas Balosecha and Sefer B'Midbar. We have the section of Yehi ben Soa separated from the rest, what comes before it, what comes after that. We actually say these words as part of the tefillah when we take out the Sefer Torah on Shabbos, Mondays, and Thursdays, Shabbos afternoon. We say V'yehi ben Soa Aron, and when the Arab began to travel. And in the Sefer Torah itself, and even in the Chumash, you draw them as well. In the Sefer Torah itself, it's got an upside down nun before this section. It's only a few psukim, and then an upside down nun at the end of the section. And of course the Gemara asked the question, why is that the case? Because this is not an unusual thing to find in the Sefer Torah, a large aleph, but upside down nun's the only place it really happens. It does happen to Tehillim actually by a few times as well, but not in the Sefer Torah. So they asked the question, why is the upside down nun? So Rashi explains right there in the Chumash and brings down, based upon the Gemara, that the Torah wanted to make a break from one punishment to another punishment, really meaning from one sin to another sin. Two sins took place back to back in Parshas B'Halosecha, and the Torah didn't want to put them together. It was just too much of a accusation against the Jewish people. So therefore the Torah made a break, and to let us know that this break is there, the Torah puts an upside down nun over here and an upside down nun over there. It looks like quotation marks almost, because it really belongs someplace else. V'yehi ben Soa Aron belongs back at the beginning of Sefer B'Midbar, in Parshas B'Midbar, not over here. And eventually it will go back to there. But in the meantime, it's here serving that purpose, breaking up the Chumash, and almost making it like 7 books, as opposed to 5 books in the end. The question is, why an upside down nun? And anybody who's been around, went through the Chanukah Shirim, knows a little Kabbalah, or even the Gemara, because the Gemara says that the world was made with Nun Shari Bina, 50 gates of understanding, and that 49 were given to Moshe Rabbeinu. And seemingly, he never got the 50th in his lifetime, which you have to understand is like, wow, when at 49 levels, if I have 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 levels, that's already amazing. 49 levels. You know what that means Kabbalistically? And, well, he was Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest prophet that ever lived, and on a whole different language, but 49 levels, it's absolutely phenomenal. It says he was born with the Oregon News. He was such a special child and adult and leader in the end. But what about the 50th? Why couldn't he get that? So the Pri Tzaddik says an interesting thing, and it's actually kind of alludes from the Gemara itself. So because that 50th level is reserved for Bali Tshuva, people who do Tshuva. The 50th gate is reserved for and Moshe says to the Jewish people before he dies, I can't be a Bal Tshuva. I didn't sin enough to be a Bal Tshuva. I made mistakes, but even my mistakes were L'Shem Shamayim and all done for specific reasons. But I'm not like a Bali Aver like other people might be. You it doesn't say that, right? But you can get that. You can get what I did not get, because you can be Bali Tshuva. Wow, it's almost worth sinning in the end. Well, not really, but this is the idea. Does he ever get it? Yes, when he dies. How do we know this? Where does he die? He dies on Har Nevo. Har Nevo is Nun Bo, right? And Nun is the 50th. That's the 50th gate. Bo, in it. At his death, God gave him the 50th gate of understanding, that clarity, and he died. In fact, it's probably what killed him in the end, an ecstasy, because that exposure of divine light was unbelievable. But somehow it's tied up with the concept of Bali Tshuva. So why an upside down Nun? Because to tell us what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, Ein Adam Chayta Ad Shenichnas Bo Ruchstus. A person does not do an avera, a sin, unless a spirit of insanity enters him or them. Because who in their right mind would do an avera? Well, there's a long list of people. We have Yom Kippur, because we do these averas, and year after year, I'm not going to do this again. Next year, I will not need to say this. And then next year comes around, I can't believe I need to atone for this one again. But we wouldn't do it, right? If someone says, someone who's been keeping kashrus for a long time, their whole life, or they're Bali Tshuva, and they've been doing it for many years, and someone says, here, eat this tray. I'm not getting this tray. Aren't you hungry? I'm starving. But I'm not going to eat this tray. Unless my life was in the line, and I have to eat this trait, but I'm not going to, because I know it's just not worth it. Whatever pleasure I'm going to get from it, it's just not worth the punishment in the end. You have to be crazy to eat treif. Well, yeah, but if you don't have that das, that knowledge, that perspective, so people do it all the time. And people are lenient with heksheri. They take risks and chances because they don't exactly know in detail, and they have doubt about things. But the Nun Shari Bina, that's what clears it all up. That's what comes against doubt. That's what undoes the doubt, gets rid of the doubt, gets rid of the lack of clarity. So therefore, if this is coming to separate two sins, well, where do the sins come from? From the upside down dust. Their knowledge was incomplete. It's as if the Nun Shari Bina, the 50 gates of understanding, were upside down. And that's why it's there in the Chumash. And that plays a major role in the whole story of Purim. But we're not going to get there yet. We left off with a bunch of questions, and we will have more questions today. But you have to understand, by Purim, the questions are all the fun. And it's not just the fun, but the questions really are what leads you down that path to clarity. Questions, when I was growing up at the university, they used to tell us, when you have difficulty answering a question, repeat the question. Start the answer up with the question, because the question is 2/3 the answer. I'm not exactly sure if that proportion is true, but it does work a lot of times, and by Purim for sure. The questions really are the answer. But we'll tie it up, God willing, if we can, by 4 sessions. If not, we'll go a little bit longer. But this is the approach that you have to take to Purim. So anybody who forgets those questions from the first session, I sent out the first session today. If you didn't get it, write to me. I'll send it to you again, B'ezras Hashem, and you can go over those questions. And there's a recording of the first session, but hopefully the video will come out this time instead. More questions, right? The Jewish, this week's Parsha, you couldn't ask for better timing. Last week was Tu B'Shvat. This week is Parshas Yisro. Parshas Yisro, Kabbalas HaTorah. And Yisro is a story unto himself, but we're not going to talk about that right now. Parshas Yisro, the Jewish people accept Torah. The whole preparation, it's a whole build-up. 50 days, the 50th day from leaving Mitzrayim, right? We get to Har Sinai. There's a reason why it's 50, because of Nun Shoyed Bina. We just spoke about that, right? So the Jewish people get to Mount Sinai, and it says, V'hichen neged ahar, tachas ahar, at the base of the mountain. And Rashi points out, just, the word v'hichen is singular to tell you the Jewish people got to this level, this phenomenal level, incredible level of ke'ishecha b'levecha, like a single person with a single heart. And that's not incidental. That's going to play a role also in terms of Kabbalas HaTorah. Hopefully, we'll get back to that. And then Moshe goes up and he comes back down again and he goes in and he says to the Jewish people, "Do you want God's Torah?" I'm tempted to tell that joke, but okay, right? And the Jewish people, of course, being the Jewish people, ask the question, "How much does it cost?" And of course, Moshe says it's for free. It's not really for free, but it doesn't cost money. So the Jewish people say, "We'll take 2." And so Moshe he comes back with 2 lochos, and then he breaks them. But before that happens, it's actually brought down in next week's parsha, in Parshas Mishpatim. But the Jewish people are asked, "Do you want the Torah?" And they answer with famous words, "Naaseh v'nishma." We will do it, and we will understand it later. And we are praised for this because most people will say, "What's in it? What's involved?" Right? What do we have to do? Right? Oh, all that. Can we think about that? Can we get back to God like in a week or so and talk amongst ourselves? It's like they don't even do that. Naaseh v'nishma. We will do it, whatever it is, whatever it says, and after that, we will work it out and think it through and understand it and see what we got ourselves into. But we're devoted. And the Gemara says that when Hashem heard those words, Naaseh v'nishma, he asked, "Who taught my children the language of the angels?" Because angels talk like that. Men don't talk like that. People don't talk like that. Because we're always worried about getting it over our heads, over committing ourselves. God goes to Asaph and says, "What's do you want the Torah?" And he says, "What's inside?" So God tells him, "No, I don't want it." Goes to Yishmael, "Want my Torah? What's inside?" No, I don't want it. Like, everybody else, what's inside? Would all it? Thank God he's not offering it today, because for sure we probably hire a team of lawyers to go through all the fine print to find out exactly what we're getting hooked into before we would actually say yes and no, and the whole world would be destroyed. Because I have no patience, because the Gemara says that the Torah is the basis for creation. If the Jewish people did not accept Torah at Mount Sinai, then the world would have gone back to null and void. So we had to accept Torah. So that's what happens, and God praises us for that, and we praise ourselves for that, and we're all impressed that we said Naaseh v'nishma. The only problem is that the Gemara in Shabbos says something a little bit differently. It says the following thing. The verse says, I'll read the English, "And Moshe brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the lowermost part of the mount." That is Shmos. This week's Parsha, the 17th verse, chapter 19, 17th verse. Here's what the Gemara says. Rav Adimi Bar Chama Bar Chasa said, the Jewish people actually stood beneath the mountain. In other words, when it says that Moshe brought the Jewish people to the lowermost part of the mountain, because the Lashon is Tachas Ahar, it's under the mountain. Tachas means underneath, under the mountain. So what do you mean under the mountain? How do you get under the mountain? Well, the Gemara darshans this out. It says they actually stood beneath the mountain, and the verse teaches us that the Holy One, blessed be He, overturned the mountain above the Jews like a top, like a large container, like took the mountain, overturned it and held it over their heads, and said to them, right? It's called Har Kegigas, the mountain like a barrel, like a large container. And he said to them, if you accept my Torah, accept the Torah, great, fantastic, mutav, it's good, excellent. And if not, this will in fact be your burial place. I'm going to drop the mountain on top of you. Boom, that's it. Say no, what happened to the lights? Gone, just like that. That's what the Gemara says, right? So Havacha Bar Yaakov says, right? He brings it down. He says, there is a substantial caveat here to the obligation to fulfill the Torah. The Jewish people can claim that they were coerced into accepting the Torah, and it is therefore not binding. He's saying that the Jewish people could, technically speaking, based upon this, I mean, I don't know how you fight this with God. I mean, you go to the heavenly base and say, we plead innocence because you know why? This is forced upon us. God, right, who made all of us and everything, he held the mountain over our heads and he threatened us. And he said to us, if you don't accept my Torah, here's where you're going to be buried. That's coercion. So I'm not responsible for having, what am I supposed to say? No, and get buried? Forget it. So we're free, we're pater. So Rava said, even so, okay, they again accepted it willingly in the time of Achashverosh, the time of Purim. I mean, you look in the Megillah; it doesn't have anything specifically about that. We don't look at the story of Purim as Kabbalas HaTorah Part 2. We don't see this as a continuation. What happens in this week's Parashat? This week's Parashat is tied to Purim. I mean, less than a month is Purim, but what's going on this week's Parsha, it's just part 1. And next week is all part of part 1. And then 1,000 some odd years later comes part 2, the time of Achashverosh and Haman and all that, right? So he says they accepted it willingly, as it says, right, in the Megillah. The Jews ordained and took upon themselves and upon their seed and upon all such as joined themselves unto them, whatever that means in English over here. And he taught the Jews ordained what they had already taken upon themselves through coercion at Sinai. They darshan up this verse. This verse is really talking about Purim, what's going on at that time. But the Gemara learns out, it elucidates this verse and says that the Jewish people then finally took upon themselves what originally had been, because of the coercion, and now they willingly and lovingly took it upon themselves, the Torah. So really, Purim is really the completion of this week's Parsha. Well, I mean, anyhow, we don't get to keep these luchos. Moshe breaks them because of the golden calf. And then we have to go through 40 days of tshuva, repentance, and Moshe begs for the Jewish people. And then finally he comes back on Yom Kippur with the new set of tablets. And even then it's not the same level, and it's not the same thing, and all that we've gone through. Purim is the end of the story of Kabbalas HaTorah. That's finally when the Jewish people accept Torah. So, if Purim in fact was Kabbalas HaTorah Part 2, then this would explain why Haman, who is supposed to be a descendant of Amalek, if not literally, then certainly spiritually, is part of the picture. Because if you look in last week's Parsha, the last thing that happens in advance of getting to the Sinai desert is we have a war with Amalek. Amalek shows up. The Jewish people ask the question, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im ayin, is God amongst us or not? And Amalek attacks, and there's a whole mashal there, and the Jewish people do tshuva, and they finally come to Har Sinai and receive Torah. And that kind of seems incidental, but it's not really incidental, because Rashi points out that the Torah says in this week's Parsha that they came from Refidim. Refidim is where the battle took place. And the Gemara says Refidim really means Raf Yadayim, that the Torah was weak in their hands, so that's why Amalek attacks, which means we had doubt, and Amalek is doubt, and that attacked us. So it seems to be that that's not an accident. I mean, it's kind of out of place. I mean, even Amalek's, criticized of all the time to attack the Jewish people. That was not the time to do it. And they paid the price for it. We did too. But they did the most. It was suicide. It was a suicide mission. That's what Rashi brings down later in Parashat Kiseitse. When we go back and refer to Amalek's attack again, he's compared to a person standing by a boiling hot bath, and no one can go into it because it's boiling, it's scalding. And this guy jumps in and he burns himself and cools it down for everybody else. Nobody else was prepared to attack the Jewish people right out of Mitzrayim, because that's Meshuggah. It's like nuts, crazy. You have a death wish over here? Apparently, because they attack the Jewish people, and they do some harm, 100%, but they get almost wiped away completely. God declares a war against it for all history from that point onward. Right? And then the Jewish people come to Mount Sinai, and it says again in this week's parsha, they came from Rephidim. And Rashi says we know that. I mean, what was it? There's a gap between last week's parsha and this week's parsha. I mean, my memory is so short. True. Okay, we read it last week, and now there's another parsha, but it's not so hard for me to recall that last week was Parshas Bashalach, and at the end there in a place called Rephidim, Yadayim, and they, Amalek, and how, why must it mention Rephidim all over again? So Rashi explains, because the Torah wants to tell you that they left Rephidim doing tshuva. They left doing tshuva. And they arrived at the Sinai desert doing tshuva. The tshuva didn't stop. Okay. Nice. Interesting point. Essential? I mean, we're talking about Kabbalas HaTorah. Essential? Do we have to know this right now? And Amalek was the vehicle, the means to cause this tshuva in the Jewish people, but is this essential? Well, if you're going to say that you have to be about tshuva to get to the Nunt Shari Bina, the 50th gate of understanding, it seems to be perfect preparation for Kabbalas HaTorah. And what does Haman do? What does Haman do? Haman, is like the exact same thing. He attacks the Jewish people. He can't help himself. He goes out of his way. He can't stand these people. He's got to attack the Jewish people. And he takes a nation that in the beginning of the story has no problem going to the feast of Achashverosh. Okay, they'll eat kosher and they'll drink wine that's, it's before the Gezer, I think, of Yain, Stam Yin at this point in time. They don't belong there. In fact, the Talmidim of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai asked him what the Jewish people had done at that time to warrant such a dramatic and severe reaction from Shemaim that they almost got wiped away. And the answer is they went to the feast of Achashverosh. In the end, they kind of pushed it off a bit, but it is what it is. There's a point being made over there, and they're all assimilated, not paying attention. When Ezra brings the Jewish people back to Eretz Yisrael after the story of Purim, we're a mess. It's all mixed up. It's all muddled. We're not clear. People have lost their path, lost their ways. It's strengthen them spiritually and reteach them again and get it back. But this is what's going on. And in the end, because of Haman and the whole story, what Mordechai does and antagonizes him, he gets Haman out of his shell and brings him out and he attacks, right? For 3 days, the Jewish people fast. And they pray to Kodesh Baruch Hu, and they do some very serious tshuva, and then we find out it's Kabbalas HaTorah all over again, and it seems to be a pattern. So it makes good sense. It makes sense that if this in fact is Kabbalas HaTorah Part 2, Purim, right? The only question is that what is it, or where was it, or what specifically about Purim made them do this particular thing? Well, according to many actually, that when it says that they said Nasa v'nishma, they only really said that regarding Torah Ksav, the written law. That's the 5 books of Moshe. Chamisha Chumshei Torah. That's what God was offering them. They said, the fine print that came later on. And you see at Mount Sinai, God gives over the 10 Commandments. Oh, that's that makes I'm the Lord your God who took you out of Mitzrayim. Fine, I'm good with that one. Don't have any other gods besides me. Okay, I can live with that 100%. Let's leave behind Avodah Zarah. Keep Shabbos. Well, we've been doing that since Mitzrayim anyhow to some degree. So now we just do a bit more. Honor your father and mother. Yes, no, but we can do that. Murder, adultery, stealing, or really kidnapping in the 10 Commandments, and don't cut all these things. Like okay. We can still have a pretty good life, even with 10 Commandments, until we find out there are 613 commandments, and the 613 commandments have a lot of details. Just walk into a base measure today and look at the Shas, look at the Talmud Bavli, which is based upon the Mishnah, massive, 36 tractates. And you know what? It wasn't good enough we have one of them. We have to have 2 of them. One is from Bavel, Babylonia. That's the main one we learned. And one is Yerushalmi from Eretz Israel. Overlap, but not completely. A lot to learn. And then, of course, there's the Shulchan Aruch to make things simpler. But before that, there was the Rambam who explained everything, and commentaries upon commentaries. It's not called the Sea of Talmud for no reason. It literally is a vast, how are you supposed to know all this? We need a lot of help from God, that's for sure. But it's massive. So when the Jewish people said Nasa v'nishma, they're really saying it regarding Torah B'chsav, the written law. Then God said, oh, and here, by the way, are the details. My background is architecture, and I worked for my father for many years, right? And you have the plans, right? The set of plans, 10, 12, 14 big, huge drawings, basically. But then you have the book of details. The book of details are all the specifications and specific things, what type of beams, what type of screws, what type of this, what type of that detail every last, and on the drawing itself, it says, refer to this, refer to this, refer to the page, whatever, right? And it's massive. It goes on. And even through the entire job, you're revising. The plans pretty much stay the same because it's just the general outlooks. The Torah itself says you have to wear tefillin. What's a tefillin? What does it look like? How do you wear it? You have to be kosher, shchita, right? What's shchita? How do you carry it out? Well, there's a whole Shulchan Aruch and things like that. Basar b'chalav, milk and meat. There's a whole section. Smicha, the whole smicha program, that I went through included, basically three things: the laws of milk and meat, and that took a long time to learn, and tarovis, forbidden mixtures, right? And malicha, how to salt meat, if you can imagine that. And it sounds like just take the salt and salt the meat. Well, no. There's a whole section on what that's about. And that's just one smicha program. Others learn Shabbos. Shabbos, like it's a lifelong project to know all the laws of Shabbos. Even just Purim, which is a rabbinic holiday, is like a book this thick. So when the Jewish people, they said Nasa v'nishma, they were only saying it with respect to Torah B'chsav, the written law, right? Not with respect to Torah Shebaal Peh. That's when God held the mountain over their heads. It's a package deal. You can't have half and half. It's all one thing. Because the reality is that everything in the oral law is inside the written law. But if it was written up in the written law, then first of all, it's not possible because the oral law expands. The principles never change. Those are the mitzvahs, the basic halachas. They don't change. But in every generation, there's technology and there's advancements. And you have to be able to apply the halacha to those advances. The basis, we have light switches today. But it still goes back to the 39 activities on Shabbos you can't do. Lighting a fire, building something, right? It fits into one of these categories. So that never changes. But the applications, what to do, what's permissible, what about an emergency, that's always changing. History changes, the applications. So the Sea of Talmud expands. Not the Talmud itself, but the commentaries, and then there's commentaries and the commentaries and commentaries. It's pretty overwhelming, unless you love it. Then it's like, if you enjoy ice cream, you want more and more and more. And somehow something happened in the story of Purim that changed their perspective with respect to the oral law, not the written law. That they accepted with the full heart from the beginning all the way through. It was the oral law they had to be coerced. And you see this is the bone of contention through history. What does Reform and Conservative Judaism? Well, Reform Judaism is a different story altogether, but Conservative Judaism, they hold by the written law pretty much completely. What don't they hold by? The oral law. It's a bunch of rabbis who came along and gave their own. No, it's not. The oral law was given to God from God to Moshe at Mount Sinai. Applications, yes, they've got stamps with the people who did them. They're in the Sefer Sforim of Piski Halacha, but the actual principles, they're just as holy and just as divine as those mitzvahs in the written law. But they're oral. They were passed down orally. People wrote manuscripts and kept them for personal learning purposes. But for the most part, the oral law was the oral law and remained oral until persecution and assimilation and all these things in the Roman times by 186 CE, after the Second Temple was destroyed. Rabbi Yehuda and Nasi gathered together, all his colleagues, And they took that oral tradition and they recorded it as the Mishnah. And then, of course, that became impossible to maintain. So by 499 CE, 500 approximately, they wrote down the Talmud. And that's more or less the structure of learning to this very day, from which all Jewish law comes from. But you'll have all the commentaries in the Talmud, and that will expand as time goes on. And that's what had to be forced upon them until Purim. And on Purim, right, all of a sudden, so that's when they said, okay, we now, with a full heart, on behalf of ourselves, on behalf of the Jewish people, accept the Torah Sheba'al Peh Nasa B'Nishma, and it's complete. Why? What changed? I mean, why is that the response to the story of Purim? So we'll get back to that, God willing. But there's another question to ask, another perspective to bring into the. It's like making a fancy dish, right? You keep adding the ingredients. When it's all done, put together, and you bake it, you get the cake, you get the pie, you get the food, and hopefully it tastes delicious. You did it all right. Hopefully, by the last session, what we talk about there, we'll bring all this together, God willing, if we can do it in time, right? But this is important to know, because Purim, as we'll see, represents a supreme opportunity once a year that is not matched by any other holiday, not matched by any other event. Purim is a unique portal to a level of reality that comes around basically one day a year. You can theoretically reach it without the day of Purim. It's just that it's so much easier in Purim itself if you're doing it right, doing the mitzvahs right. So going further, okay? Now, not only does Amalek precede the giving of Torah, but there's another episode that also occurs in advance. And it seems to be connected because, as we said before, when the Gemara asks the question, Haman min Torah menayin, where's Haman allude to the Torah? So then it says Hamina ate, when God says to Adam Arishon, did you eat from the tree? The word Hamin is the word min with the hey in front of it to say, did you? It's a question. And the Gemara therefore says Hamin is the same word as Haman. So that is in fact an allusion to Haman back there by the tree of knowledge, good and evil. And it's not because the Gemara is desperate for a source, because there are other words in the Chumash, for example, the word Haman, which even sounds like Haman. Haman means the man. It's referred to as the man. Man is the word, like min man, and Haman is the man that fell from Shemayim, and the Jewish people ate that right before the attack of Amalek. Now, the reason why this ties in is because the Gemara says in Shabbos that if the Jewish people had just kept one Shabbos, no nation would ever have been able to attack them, because it would have been the Messianic era. Well, which Shabbos are we talking about? Well, the Gemara says, how do we know this? What's the source for this idea? So Gemara says that the V'yavel Amalek. And when does V'yavel Amalek come? Last week's Parsha. And what does that follow? That follows the story of the man, right? The story of the man, when the Jewish people are told by Moshe Rabbeinu that they're go collect the man, and that because they were complaining there's no food because their matzah ran out from leaving Mitzrayim, and they asked for the meat and they asked for the bread, and God says, I'm going to rain down man from Shemayim, and God says this, tonight you'll know when the man starts to fall that I am the God that took you out of Mitzrayim. Why is it? What? You had a question about that after all that you've seen and gone through it, and the Kriyas Yamsu, splitting of the sea, and the 10 plagues back in Mitzrayim. You have a question about who took you out of Mitzrayim, and how does the man actually prove that more than any other mitzvah, like Shemitah? We're not Shemitah yet, but we can say it later on. But that's what it says. That's what God says. He makes that point. Now, because that pasuk about Amalek attacking is the Talmud's source to say that no nation would have attacked us, well, that's coming in last week's parsha after the story of the man. So it was that Shabbos we had to keep. God gave the Jewish people that Shabbos and the man. And the man, by this, very much tied to Shabbos, because the Medrash says that all the days of the week are paired up. Sunday is paired with Monday, Tuesday is paired with Wednesday, Thursday is paired with Friday. So Shabbos says, what about me? I'm the odd day out over here, right? So the Gemara says that you'll be sanctified. You'll be sanctified. Well, first of all, the Jewish people will be your partner, but the Gemara says when Shabbos was sanctified, it was sanctified with the double portion of the man, because what happened? God told Moshe Rabbeinu at the very beginning to tell the Jewish people. He says to them that it's going to fall every night. In the morning, you'll get up. You're going to find the man between two layers of dew, like in a little box, protected, packaged beautifully, marketed wonderfully, and you'll go out and collect the man. And there's one omer for every person. Doesn't make a difference, an adult, a child, an elderly person, a young person, appetite, no appetite, one omer per person. You can take a lot, the extra is going to rot. Take a little bit, somehow the little bit will become the omer. And everybody gets an omer. That's it. And that'll be all you'll need. And not only that, it can taste like anything, almost anything you want. So it's like this thing, it's like chalky type color thing, but mystical and magical, and all your nutritious, needs, corresponds to Torah Sev, right? That the actual man, because it came through Moshe, corresponds to the written law, and the water from the Be'er Miriam's well, that corresponds to Torah Baal Peh, but that's a different discussion for the time being. Except on Erev Shabbos, God says to Moshe, tell the Jewish people that it's not going to fall on Shabbos, but they'll be able to collect a double portion on Erev Shabbos, and the extra for the first time that week will not rot. Cook it, bake it, fry it, whatever you want to do with it before Shabbos, because you can't do it on Shabbos, and it won't be in the fields on Shabbos. So tell the Jewish people that. One omer every day, Erev Shabbos, 2 omers, right? 1 omer for Friday, 1 omer for Shabbos. On Erev Shabbos, a miracle will take place. Now, when God tells the Jewish people about this, he uses the word v'haya. V'haya b'yom hashishi. It will be on the 6th day. And the Gemara says v'haya in Megillah, of all tractates, right? V'haya is lashon simcha. When a verse begins with the word v'haya, is coming to tell you something nice, joyous, right? So what's the joyous thing here? The joyous thing is on Erev Shabbos, you'll be able to collect the double portion. That's a nice thing. Later on, when the Jewish people actually go out to collect the man on Erev Shabbos, it says Vayehi b'yom hashishi. And it was on the 6th day they went out to collect the omer of man, and they found that the extra man didn't rot. And they were curious. 5 days of the week until now, if we took too much man, the extra rotted or dissolved or whatever, right? And now, for some reason, the 6th day, we're taking extra. Is the system, saying break? They're saying, some not doing their job over here. Why is it not, dissolving, disappearing? So they came to the princes, the Nasiim, and said, look what happened. We corrected, more than an omer. It's not rotting. What's going on over here? We don't know, right? They went to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, what's pshat? What's happening? So I'm like, oh, that's what God told me to tell you. That you'll go on the 6th day, and you'll be able to collect 2 omers, 1 for Shabbos, and here are the halachas of Shabbos and all that, et cetera, et cetera. It's all. But then I'm looking at tax. Now, one of the reasons why, because Das and Vaviram, they go out looking for man on Shabbos to try to make Moshe look like a liar. So the birds come along and eat whatever extra, man's left over from day 6 and all that, and all stories. We put out food for the birds last Shabbos and Shabbos Shir before Shabbos if there's no Erev, right? And show our appreciation of the birds for helping Moshe Rabbeinu look like the person who was telling the truth. Okay, fine. We have to look at that some of the time, but that's what's going on over there with the birds. But the main point is, because then God gets angry with the Jewish people and he yells at Moshe Rabbeinu. So Rashi says it's like a farmer or someone goes out to collect weeds, to pull the weeds out so that things can grow properly. And by accident, he pulls out one of the flowers too, or one of the vegetables too. So God's like pulling the weeds up by getting angry at those people who are breaking Shabbos. And he happens to hit Moshe Rabbeinu along the way. Even human beings don't make the mistake usually. Kosh Baruch Hu, Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Sifsei Chachamim explain what Rashi means, and that is that Moshe was in fact getting some flack because he failed to tell the Jewish people about the extra Omer of Man Erev Shabbos. And therefore God was upset about this. He didn't do his job properly. I'm not saying that. That's what it says, okay? And that's the reason why it says V'haya over there and V'yehi over here. Because God said it, and it was going to be a great thing to tell the Jewish people in advance to go out and collect the Omer of Man, the extra Omer, and it won't rot for Shabbos, put it away, whatever. And instead, they discovered it for themselves, and therefore it says V'yehi, as if to say it was kind of a sadish thing. But it doesn't really make sense, does it? Because usually, what usually brings more joy to a person? When they know about a surprise coming up, or they find it a surprise for themselves. Usually the other way around. That's where we have surprise birthday parties. I'm going to make you a surprise birthday party next week, okay? How do you feel about that one? Well, it's not a surprise anymore, okay? But when surprise birthday party is like, wow, it's like what shock and excitement. So shouldn't it be the way around? V'hi over there and V'hai over here. They did. Wow, look, Moshe, look, the man's not rotting. It's incredible. It's like what's happening? It's exciting. No, different. So why not? So there's one sefer called Zev Yitraf, and it says in the sefer, he talks about this entire thing, and he brings proofs of the idea. He said because there was a difference in the quality of the miracle that took place, a difference in the quality of what happened. Because they went out and they collected 2 omers of man and found that the second one didn't rot. A miracle. Why is it a miracle? Because b'derech teva, so to speak, it's not teva, it's all miracle, but teva meaning it's consistent, because for 5 days, consistent, the extra has been rotting away. So the fact that now it's not is called a miracle. But they collected 2. It's just that the second one didn't disappear. In science, we'd probably call it a phenomenon. A phenomenon, I once read, is anything that happens basically once in 20 times. That's already called a phenomenon. And we investigate. Why? Why is it different here? Why now? What are the parameters of this transformation? We ask that question. So this is a miracle, but it's also a phenomenon because the second Omer, it's not like it came from nowhere. It's there, but it's just not disappearing. So why isn't that disappearing? Okay, that answers the question. As opposed to what? As opposed to if Moshe Rabbeinu had first told the Jewish people like he was supposed to, and said, you should know on Erev Shabbos, when you go out to collect your Omer, still collect only one. Only one. One Omer, not 2, 1. But when you do collect it, say the words, Lechaved Shabbos Kodesh, and you'll see it become 2 before your very eyes. That's not called a phenomenon. That's called magic. That's called a miracle. Something that's really what? Now, if it's something you could add water to and it expands, that's the nature of the thing, right? Like meat. When they add water to meat, it makes the meat look bigger. That's why, when you cook it, it shrinks all the way down, right? But this doesn't, you don't add anything. It's just that the one, by saying words, L'chavet Shabbos Kodesh, for the sake of Shabbos, I'm picking up this Omer of Man for the sake of Shabbos, and the Shabbos Omer itself becomes visible on its own. And you have 2 Omers by collecting 1. So which is a bigger miracle? Obviously the second. To have 2 and not have 1 rot, that's a miracle. That's a phenomenon. And we can explain that. And we can rationalize that. But to have 1 and say 3 words, just words, not touch it, not bake it, not beat it, not run your hands over it, right? So just say L'chavet Shabbos Kodesh, and it becomes 2. That's already light years away. And that's why it starts off a Haya in the beginning and a Vihi over here. Because it's like, we blew it. We could have had that level of miracle. We could have had 1 man become 2. Instead, we took 2 and did it become 1. And then they ask the question, is God amongst us or not? Does it follow? Haman, It's a connection. Absolutely. What's the connection? I have to see. But it might be worth pointing out also that the word Haman or Haman or Hamin is also Haim Nun. They are 50, which we now know it refers to the Nun Shari Bina, the 50 gates of understanding, which have to be very much connected to Purim, which is why Haman is hung or hanged, whatever, from a gallows, from an eitz, right? An eitz that's 50 amas high. He built it to hang more. 50 amas high is like 100 feet. He wanted everyone to see that Mordechai was hanging. But that high up in the air, it's kind of hard to recognize who's up there, unless you have a big billboard and say, this is Mordechai, or one of these big, huge television screens that blow up the picture. But he built an 50 amas high. And then he was hung instead by it, right? In fact, a gallows itself looks like a nun to some degree. It's like almost like, right side up though, not upside down. What's the connection? We're getting warmer. We're moving in the right direction. But for today, we'll finish off with a mashal, with a story. I once read that a certain student asked Rav Hutner one Pesach also, by the way, is Freudian slip, but it fits in nicely as well. One Purim, Rav Yitzchak Hutner Zatzal was one of the Gedolei Dor from the previous generation, wrote this for him, Pachad Yitzchak, absolutely remarkable set of books on the Hashkaf of Judaism, deep understanding of ideas and concepts, and very respected for that. And one of his Talmidim once asked him, what's the whole point of drinking on Purim? Because like we said last week, Judaism does not promote a lack of dust. To drink until the point you don't recognize between Mordechai and Haman, and blessed Mordechai and Christ Haman, that's not Jewish. That's not a Jewish idea. So how does that fit in with the whole concept of Purim? So Rav Hutner answered with a mashal, with a parable. He said, imagine, right? There were once two boys, 200 years ago, let's say in Europe, before there was all this transportation and all this, the post office, things, for all intents and purposes, one city, hundreds of miles away, was like on the other side of the planet. That's how hard it was to get to, how hard it was to connect with it, right? And two boys who grew up in the same town, they become best friends from a very young age. They go to Yeshiva Ketana together, and they go to Yeshiva Gedola together, and they become mature, Talmidim, learning Torah. They learn together, tremendous respect for them, and they love each other. They're very close to each other, right? And what happens is that it comes time to get married. And because they're both such good learners, so their fathers go looking for shidduchim and to find some father-in-law that might be able to help them out and keep them in learning longer. And it turns out that one father finds a shidduch for his son in some town hundreds of miles away, and turns out that the other father finds a shidduch for his son also hundreds of miles in the other direction. So now it's double the distance away from each other. And it's so hard for them to be able to say goodbye, but that's what has to happen. And they go off to get married, and they begin their families. They, in the beginning, try and stay in touch with each other, but the letters take so long to go back and forth, and they have responsibilities. The families grow, and eventually, after a while, they stop communicating. They don't stop loving each other. They still remember those days, but you know what it's like. And they stop writing to one another, and traveling to see each other is almost out of the question. So years go by, maybe even decades. They grow up, they mature, long beards, long coats and the whole thing. Even like they're like Rosh Yeshivas or Rabbanim or giving shiurim, giving classes in yeshivas. They're prominent people in their own time. And for some reason, they both have to travel at the same time. Divine providence. It's a story. We can do things like this, right? And they're traveling at the same time. And they end up, as it would be, at the same train station at the same time. And they happen to be walking by each other at the same time, because you can't walk by each other not at the same time, right? And they literally pass each other. And as they pass each other, they look at each other and they nod to one another because they don't know who they're looking at. Just like they see a fellow Jew in a non-Jewish place, you feel a certain a kinship. So they nod at each other. But as they do and they walk by, something inside like goes off. Like, what? Do I know this person? Do I recognize this person? And they literally both stop and turn around the same time. And there's a sense of recognition, David, Shlomo, is that you? Is it possible after all this time? Look at you, and they're like overwhelmed with the divine providence that could bring them together like this, and all the love and friendship they have from years comes welling up from inside them. They run to each other and they embrace each other. They can't even let go. They walk over to the bench, literally holding on to each other. Tell me that you can't even talk fast. What happens? Well, I heard about you. You're giving classes and you're famous. And I heard about you. You're Rosh Hashanah. Like going on, for about 20 minutes, just, as much as they can possibly catch up, because they know, that this time is limited. And finally, they hear a train whistle go. And one turns and says, "Which way are you going?" "I'm going east." "Which way are you going?" "I'm going west." How can it be? Who knows when we're going to see each other again? We're not young anymore. How's this possible? I mean, it's wonderful to be together like this, but but to split and only like 20 minutes together after all this time. So one says to the others, "I have this idea. I bought this bottle of wine. I bought it for Shabbos. Okay, it was kind of a special bottle of wine, but I think I have a more something way more special to do with it. How about you take this glass with the wine, take it to your conductor, give him a drink. I'll take the bottle, what's left of it, to my conductor. We'll get the conductors drunk, and no one's going anywhere for at least a good hour." Now, that's not going to happen in real life, obviously. I mean, if any train conductor that could be convinced to drink wine on duty, pretty scary. It's not going to happen. But in the story, that's what happens over here. Okay, and as a result of that, he gets his conductor drunk, and he gets his conductor drunk. And the trains don't go anywhere, and they sit there for at least a good hour and a half, catching up on days gone by, and they leave each other at least feeling that they had some time together. Rav Hutner was saying, the mashal, the nimshal, the explanation of what he was saying basically was, we come into this world as souls, and the word neshama itself, neshama, soul, right? Nun shama. Like nun shari bina, shama, there, the soul. The soul is a source of nun shari bina, because anyhow, the Gemara in Nida says that before a child is born, an angel goes inside, or whatever, how it does it, right? Today, maybe just goes online, right? But little kids inside going like this, keeping track, using Zoom meetings, right? And he teaches the child the entire Torah, all of it, Torah Shebiksav, Torah Shebal-Peh, every single last detail. And right before the child's born, touches him right here, forgets his learning, doesn't lose it, forgets it. All of learning we learn from this is just remembering. When you learn something for the first time, it's not the first time. You got that in the womb. So why does it feel like the first? No, it doesn't feel like the first time. As if you knew it before. Yeah, because it was on the unconscious level, and you brought it to the conscious level by hearing it from the teacher or reading in a sefer. So we come into the world as neshamas, as nun shamas, full of nun shari bina. No ikuvim, no blocks, no masachim, no mass. That's our bodies, Bodies are not nun shari bina, just the opposite. They want to go back to the ground. I want to die. Okay, I'll take a sofa instead. But I don't want the mitzvahs. I don't want them. It's lazy. Wants comfort. Get the body motivated. Not easy to do, right? We come as souls. And then what happens? The train's running this way and it's running that way. Our bodies are like trains. Don't stop for a moment. They're going here. They want that. Finally, when the day is over and the body's finally tired, now I can you fall asleep. I can finally learn. I know people who love learning, and the situation forced them to seemed to force them to go work. They had to get jobs, they get professions and all that, and their supporters, and they come home at the end of the day to learn some Torah and takes them all of 5-10 minutes. You know how many daf yomi shirim there are? You walk into a daf yomi shir, and how many heads are like this? Yeah, they're not looking deeper into the pshat. People get exhausted. They fall asleep. And it's not because they don't want to learn. They want to learn. The soul's like thirsty. Give me some Torah after a whole day of being involved in the secular world. But body says, don't bug me. I'm tired. Or I'm busy. In the middle of the day when it has energy, it wants to go eat. It wants to go, it's got to solve business problems. It wants to make money. It wants to go, poor soul. Cut off, strangled spiritually. It gets buried. And we look at each other, we see bodies. But there's soul. That's the essence of who we are, is our soul, but it gets buried and lost under. So Purim comes along once a year, and you get the conductor drunk. That's what you do. There's a halacha, right? That before you begin the Purim Suda, give a short Devar Torah. Because it says we had aura, we had light, right? Torah Shabbat Peh. Give a short, before the Suda begins, before you even wash, give a short Devar Torah, then wash, and then give lots of Devar Torah in the meal itself. But the whole point of the drinking, Rav Hutner said on Purim, was to get the conductor drunk, not so you lose consciousness, but so the soul can come out and be a soul and connect to other souls as souls. And the world, you look in the mirror and you don't see a body anymore. I mean, you do see a body, it's right, still there, but you're feeling like a soul. That's what Purim comes to release, that nun shama, the neshama, the soul. And somehow the man was supposed to do that too. And somehow Haman helped with that. Amalek, right? Didn't want to. A lot of times the enemy tries to do one thing, but that helps with the opposite. As one story goes, apparently one of the renegades told a Roman officer, "You want to wipe us out? Leave us alone. We'll do it to ourselves. But you attack us, we band together. We rise to the occasion. We become who we're supposed to be." And then comes Torah, Kabbalas HaTorah, and Torah Shabbat Peh. Noach was supposed to be Moshe. This is what the Gemara says. The same Gemara that talks about Haman being from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, asks the same question. Where's Moshe in the Torah? We spoke about this last week. And it says Shagam. That's backed by Noach. Why backed by Noach? Because the priest explains, because Noach was supposed to be Moshe Rabbeinu. 40 days and 40 nights of rain, that was the 40 days and 40 nights Moshe's Mount Sinai. And the 150 days that the water surged from below, 3 times 50. 3 times the Nun Shorei, which has to be the source of the Torah Shabbat. It's no discussion. Just to point out, it's all connected. It's all part of the same story. The Purim was in the works for a long time. And it's all about releasing the soul, to be able to be a neshama, which of course changes our whole divine providence, our whole hashgacha pratis. It's what allows a Jew to rise above the everyday mundane reality and live miraculously. Whoa, let me change that. We always live miraculously. The Jewish people, as the lesson points out, exist. But the difference is, when you go up there, you can see it, and you have the confidence in it. And that allows you to not only achieve your own personal completion, but it allows you to become a partner with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the fulfillment of the mandate of creation. And that's all tied to Purim, which is why Purim is so high up there, and why Yom Kippur is a day like Purim. We just need to know how, and how those mitzvahs play into it, because those mitzvahs were hand-picked, mind-picked, specifically, because in them is a path, it's a key to a level of perfection that once you reach it or on your way to getting it, there's no pleasure greater than that.